Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on EPA's new UST Finder. My name is Charles Reyes, Associate Director at SWMO. Just going to go over a little housekeeping before we get started. All attendees and participants are going to be on mute for the duration of this webinar. If you have a question for the presenters during the webinar, please use the question tool on the control panel to submit a written question at any time. Note who the question is for when you submit. Questions directed to the speakers will be held until after the presentation when I'll verbally introduce them for a response. Other questions, specifically technical or logistical questions, will be answered by written response during these presentations. We'll attempt to answer all questions live, but we may have to respond to questions after the webinar. Also, please note that there are 3 handouts provided in your control panel for download: the UST Finder User Manual, UST Finder Fact Sheet, and UST Finder Quick Start Guide. These presentations and a recording of today's webinar will be made available on the ASTSWMO website and shared with all registered attendees shortly after the webinar. So today you'll be hearing first from Mark Barolo, Acting Director for US EPA's Office of Underground Storage Tanks, and Matt Jones, SWMO's Tank Subcommittee Chair from New Hampshire's Department of Environmental Services. Following their brief remarks, we'll have a presentation and demonstration of the UST Finder by Fran Kramer and Alex Hall. Fran is a senior scientist and Alex a geographer for EPA's Office of Research and Development, where they conduct research on USTs. This research is centered on risk management of contaminated sites, including the temporal and spatial impacts of water and land resources and corrosion in the tank's infrastructure. Please welcome Mark Barolo to get us started. Mark?
Okay, good afternoon or good morning, depending where you're signing in from, and welcome to all the US partners on the call today. I know we have...
Right, looks like we have some technical difficulties. Mark has just signed off, so we'll get back to Mark when he logs back on. Let me turn it over to Matt Jones.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Glad you all could join us. I hope your families are safe and healthy out there. And on behalf of ASTSWMO, just want to welcome you to the UST Finder webinar. This has been a tool that we've been working on for at least a couple of years, it feels like at this point, and it's ever changing and ever developing. Would love to hear feedback from you guys as you hear all this stuff and think of other things that we may be able to do to improve the tool. Thank yous first to Fran and Alex and their team from ORD, the folks from OUST, the ASTSWMO Tank Subcommittee, as well as the task forces and all the folks that have put in the effort to develop this tool. And of course, Charles Reyes and TJ behind the scenes doing the IT stuff for this webinar, as well as all the other webinars that you guys see from time to time. This is, as I said, it's a great tool. You'll see, obviously, it's really useful for the prevention side, for the WEST side. But like myself, when I first started looking at this, I already saw a use for our emergency response folks in New Hampshire, our drinking water folks in New Hampshire as well, among others. So keep your mind open to what other folks might be able to use this tool to their benefit. And keep an eye out for regional updates. There's going to be ever-changing things coming along. Alex and his team and Fran will make changes from time to time and the updates, and the regions will be able to work with you on showing what those updates are. But I hope this tool works out well, and hope you enjoy the show. And with that, I will pass it on to Fran and Alex, or Mark if Mark is back. So thank you very much.
It looks like Mark's still not with us, so if he does return back, we'll figure out his intro later. So I'll turn it right over to Alex and Fran.
Great, and can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Great. And then,
Okay.
Let's see here. You want to kick it off, Fran?
Okay, all right. Well, thanks to everyone. And likewise, want to thank ASTSWMO and Charles certainly for all your help, and Matt and Tara Rosie too for efforts in really bringing this together and getting input from the states. And more fundamentally and importantly too is for all of the states who have really worked with us in developing this, and states who provided us input so far on this, and we look forward to working together with you in the future. Likewise to our colleagues in AST, certainly Mark, Carolyn, and Will, and Tony, and just the needed support and collaborations in this effort, and as well for Sue Burnell and Ryan Hare for all the input and from their programmatic perspective, and all the late afternoon calls that we would ask them trying to sort through the data and figure out the data. And then I also wanted to thank our colleagues in other offices here at EPA who have contributed to developing this. We worked with Office of Water, in particular Alex Porteous, Dwayne Young, and Renee Morris, who really have been invaluable with us in, as you'll see, the Safe Drinking Water Infrastructure System data and source water protection data. So there are elements in there that reflect that. As well in our water security division, Steve Algeier, who worked with us in identifying the water utility needs and protecting the public drinking water supplies. And last but not least, in our Office of Emergency Management, Troy Swackhammer, who helped us in addressing some of the emergency response needs. So we really feel so fortunate, both Alex and I, in being able to work with such a talented and dedicated group we have here at both a state and national level, and bringing this work to fruition. So thank you very much, and for everyone's efforts in bringing this to bear. So with that, we're going to jump in, just I'll give you a quick overview here. We're going to walk through the utility of the data itself, look at some of the data sources. Then Alex is going to give you a synopsis of some of the uses of the data, and then walk into the actual demonstration of the app itself. So for those who may be not as familiar at a national level, certainly our tanks universe is comprising some 500,000 underground storage tanks itself, at some 200,000 facilities. We have remaining on our backlog some 64,000 leaking underground storage tanks to go. So we still have quite a bit of work ahead of us. And as well, with regard to the impacts of that, groundwater contamination really drives a lot of this for us, but as well, petroleum vapor intrusion, and that pathway is also of concern. While our focus has been principally from the research side in looking at the cleanup of these sites under more static conditions, obviously the extreme weather conditions bring to us another dimension, both in terms of how we think of the sites, how we think about triaging the sites, and how we think about them both spatially and temporally in addressing contamination and moving forward on these sites. So to give you a broad brush in looking at the data that is in the application, we have developed this to really readily address routine operations as well as emergency response operations. So within this structure, you'll see infrastructure data, which is the first time we've really had a national picture of this data for the underground storage tank world. The age of the infrastructure, as you'll see, not a surprise. We've got an aging infrastructure, much like the rest of our infrastructure in the US. But we can also look at the type of infrastructure, a double wall, single wall, and information associated specifically with those tanks, and which in turn leads us to information about what's the vulnerability that we have with this infrastructure. Likewise for fuels, we have information on the type of fuels and the volume of the fuels in terms of capacity of those tanks. And thirdly, importantly, the geospatial data that is brought to bear in this app really provides a wealth of information about potential impacts to our water supplies and public health in general. As an overview, in looking at impacts to the drinking water supplies, there's information that really gets down to the source water protection area and water utility that could be impacted by a leaking underground storage tank, and as well to think about pre-planning where there may be tanks that, while they may not be leaking under a different scenario, may be impacting a drinking water supply well. Likewise, we recently developed a method to estimate the number of private domestic wells by census block nationally. And this method was built on existing state well logs as well as census data to be able to provide, again, a good composite picture where we may have risk of impacts to household domestic supply wells in proximity to our tanks and tanks facilities. Thirdly, we have important information here that provides data on where our tanks are sitting at relative to a 100-year floodplain. So if we know that there's going to be higher incidence of floods occurring, it gives us insight into how we may want to manage or think about potential impacts to these sites, whether we need to bolster them to improve the facility and or we need to be thinking about triaging and creating a better approach to thinking about cleanup if there's high risk to a population or water supply in proximity to these facilities in a floodplain. It also provides information on land use types, which is specifically important to understanding petroleum vapor intrusion into structures that may be in proximity to these areas, to be able to understand what that potential exposure would be, and then overall population data as well to these facilities. So as I suggested earlier, certainly much of our attention is built around potential impacts to groundwater. And so this data really gives us a very good idea about both the spatial changes and potentially the temporal changes that can occur with changing groundwater levels. These are especially problematic to our tanks world for a number of reasons. One, that fluctuation obviously alters the plume, the extent, potentially the plume and the rate of transport. But as importantly too, we know that water in our tanks do not, the inclusion of water in our tanks is certainly leading to corrosion. So adding water to our mix is an issue. With regard to inland flooding or fluvial flooding, this as well provides information on potential groundwater vulnerability with a discharge or recharge to these plumes. And then last but not least, in terms of the saltwater intrusion, that's especially problematic to our groundwater plumes, but as well to corrosion. The saltwater is especially conducive to corrosion in our tanks infrastructure. And this can result both in terms of extreme weather events that would occur in coastal areas as well as sea level rise. And so in the next slide, it just gives you a general idea of what we're looking at with regard to coastal saltwater intrusion in our country. Certainly along the East Coast, the southern coast, and the west, we see saltwater intrusion that is a problem. Likewise, here is what's indicated too. Our facilities the plumes can extend to offshore contamination as well. So this is geospatial information that we can provide in terms of those facilities that may be located in these areas where saltwater intrusion may be problematic. As well as we experienced in many of the folks here from states who went through the Midwest flooding, you're going to be all too familiar with these scenes for the extended period of times and the range of impacts of the floods. And as the picture depicted on the left shows, we actually had tanks going down the river. And so here we can work to help define what those potential impacts will be. Presently, we're working with NOAA to develop a flood information system that we can provide up to a 10-day warning in advance of floods. This is a work in progress that'll be out in still yet 2 more years, but it's an effort where we can provide the information to facilities in advance so they know really how to button up their facilities and have more warning than what has been typical to date. Likewise, what we saw last year too is the extent of sustained flooding, in particular in the lower Mississippi area, This is a concern not only with regard to the loss of product, but with that extended period of time being submerged, corrosion of that infrastructure is a problem as well. Importantly, the extent of contamination of a plume is complicated under these scenarios. So you may already have a site that you're cleaning up that's been inundated as well. You may be creating, have a situation where new plumes are created under these scenarios. And ultimately, we're in a position that we can't access these sites and we can't stabilize these sites very well. So having this inundation information, 10-day advance information with regard to flooding can help us to determine, how do we best manage these facilities? We know they're going to be inundated for a long period of time. The risk management approaches for these facilities would be quite different than one that would the temporal time frame for flooding could be much less and could be a different risk management strategy. A key point that we had worked with our Office of Water folks on, there's a new regulation that was put in place in 2018 dealing with our water infrastructure. And basically, it's a requirement for our water utilities that they have to identify risks to their intakes as a result of unknown or extreme events in particular. So for our community, the tanks world, we're certainly on that radar that they need to know where our tanks are relative to their intakes to be responsive to this regulation. So this has started in effect. Earlier this year, the larger utilities have responded to this earlier this spring, whereas the smaller utilities need to respond by June. And this is just the early one. There will be subsequent situations that they will need to respond to this. And Alex has built a feature into the app that really helps the water utilities comply with this, number one, and two, importantly for our states and the owner operators, they know then as well if we've got a facility that may impact some of these drinking water intakes. So I think in terms of our responsiveness with regard to the tanks program and where we fit in regard to emergency response, we have a key responsibility both at a national, state, and local level to really help in preparedness. Certainly on the federal level, understanding what these floods can mean and developing these forecasts will be helpful to our states and our owner operators in better preparing for these events. And having that geospatial information provided will help in advancing better risk management approaches. And lastly, as part of what we're doing here and as what we anticipate in the future too, and just doing the outreach and the education to help identify what facilities may be vulnerable and working with the states and our local partners in advancing this. On the right-hand side too is an important aspect. This is census data that shows where population are changing in the US. I do note, however, that this is pre-pandemic. You know, how the pandemic may change that shift is yet to be determined, but nonetheless, that population shift is going towards the western states and southern states to a large extent. So we also know where we have higher populations, we have higher density of fueling facilities. So we'll need to, from a planning point of view, need to keep these trends in mind as we move forward in developing both the information on preparedness and response as well. So with regard to fueling stations and their role in disaster response, it's increasingly evident how we need to think about our facilities. Obviously, from a purely operational point of view and routine operations, we understand what our roles are, certainly for prevention and for cleanup. But more so now, with the frequency of extreme weather events occurring, we know that fueling stations are really a linchpin to both the recovery, the response efforts, and our ability to really bring back our communities. So having information available in a systematic way to not only harden these facilities against damage where we know floods can occur more frequently, but as well providing key response information to both evacuees and the responders in really recovering from one of these events. And as noted here, it was in Harvey. This is one of the larger facilities that had 120 fueling pumps. Literally, the emergency response folks were just inundating, no pun intended, this facility because it was one of the few that was not underwater at the time. So we know that our fueling facilities are a critical cog in the wheel in disaster response. So how we think about our approach to flood resilience in the United States is absolutely critical. So of course, understanding what that threat is and getting information out to our partners in advance of the floods is absolutely essential, and identifying what are those assets. So as you'll see in the course of the information that is available here, we can identify what those assets are and begin to as well identify what those consequences may be, and ultimately then look at ways to undertake mitigation. Another important study that really points to the key attributes of fueling stations and our recovery. This was work that was supported by FEMA in looking at post-hurricane response, and they reviewed Harvey, Irma, and Maria as well. And here they identified really the transportation and the fueling infrastructure as being critical to looking at distribution and impacts to the supply chains and overall. One of the key recommendations that came out of there was indeed there's really limited pre-storm assessment of what are those critical assets that we need to be considering. And then ultimately their takeaway as well is we simply have to be able to be in a position to provide the needed fuel to both the responders and to evacuees. So in summary, just looking at programmatically the database and what this means for us now and working into the future with our partners here on this call. From a prevention side, corrosion is a key asset of this database. It will help us in identifying what components in the tank system we have, identifying what are the facilities that may be vulnerable to corrosion. Many times it's been my experience over the years where we begin to have problems and we can hear from the states, well, this may be an issue. Well, this database then can help us to determine, well, what are the other components of this infrastructure? How widespread is this component, and how vulnerable are we for situations that are coming up relative to corrosion that's occurring? And likewise with flooding, it can give us better predictions to minimize those impacts and to identify what that inundation could be, and ultimately help our emergency response folks. On the cleanup side, it can help in terms of triaging the cleanups, identifying where these drinking water resources reside, look at the land use if it's highly developed, and identify what that associated risk may be to the population, and also with regard to potential for vapor intrusion. Secondly, it can help us in terms of screening technologies. So what may be appropriate for a given site, both for groundwater contamination or vapor intrusion. And here again, on the flooding side, it can help identify those facilities where we know we've got to get folks out to clean up certain sites where we're going to have greater vulnerability to drinking water supplies and or vapor intrusion that's resulted from flooding. And here again, be able to better characterize and remediate these sites as well.
Great, friend. Thank you. I'm going to take over for a bit. I'm going to go through a few slides, and then I'm going to demonstrate the UST Finder application. So first of all, how was this developed? State data or state programs are state delegated. So we had to go to each state, and we collated and standardized about 150 different databases to create one national database. UST Finder is kind of siloed into 3 data sets. We've got the leaking underground storage tank data set. We've got it for all 50 states. We've got their locations. We've got their release date, their status. Is it closed? Is it active? And then the substance released. We have the facility database. And again, 50 states and DC. We've got the locations. And then we've got the count of open, closed, and temporarily closed USTs at each facility. Then related to that, facility database are the individual USTs. We have that for 49 states and DC. And included in that data set would be the installation date, the removal date, the status, is it open or closed, the wall type, is it single or double walled. And then we also dug into, if the state had compartment databases, we would get the capacities of the compartments and the fuel types. And then I will kind of demonstrate how this all looks and feels within the application. And so we combined all this data and we got the first national picture of what here leaking underground storage tanks look like in the United States. And what you're looking at is, every dot on that map is 10 square miles. And you can see that basically every major metropolitan area in the country has between about 40 and 300 leaking underground storage tanks per 10 square miles. That's both historic releases and current ones. So really the utility of combining this data was really just, just on a crude level to kind of look nationally at releases. And then we could also look at some trends in the age of the infrastructure. If we want to take a look at that graph on the right, it is the underground storage tanks at the date at removal date. So kind of the cradle to the grave life cycle of tanks over time. Here we're looking at over 700,000 tanks and the age of the tank when it was removed. And you can see that in 1985, the average age of a tank at the time of removal was about 17 years old. Today, that's 33 years old. And then you can also look at the trend in removals. That would be the gray space in that graph. And this has implications on infrastructure integrity and corrosion and things like that. And then, because we mapped all of these locations, both the facilities and the leaking underground storage tanks, we can look at the proximity of these items to floodplains. We found that there are about 34,000 active USTs within FEMA's estimated 100-year floodplain, and that's about 250 million gallons of fuel lying within these floodplains. And the average age of these USTs is about 25 years old. And then if we kind of want to look at this data by state, you can kind of see the geography of the number of active USTs by state within a floodplain. You got Texas and Pennsylvania and Florida and Ohio with a lot. So this kind of gives you a sense of maybe risk or inundation of tanks. And within UST Finder, we can look at this proximity. Here we're just looking at Davenport, Iowa, and we can look at the proximity of both open and closed USTs to FEMA's 100-year floodplain. Some of the features that we can do in UST Finder. We can also look at the impact of underground storage tank facilities when it comes to hurricanes. There was some good mapping done of flood inundation during Harvey, and these Navy polygons on the map show areas in Texas that were inundated by Harvey. And then within UST Finder, we can overlay the underground storage tank universe and look at what might have been affected. We found that there were about 1,200 USTs that were inundated during this event, and that's about 15 million gallons of fuel that were inundated. Continuing with Harvey, we can look at the age of the tanks that were inundated. The bar graph on the left just shows all the tanks that were inundated or estimated to be inundated and their age. And you can see that it's an older cohort of tanks. There's a lot of tanks between 30 and 40 years old that were inundated. And again, could portend issues with corrosion or loss of product. And then Frank touched on the fact that this application contains information on private domestic wells and the proximity of private domestic wells to releases and tanks. This is just a map of of the number of private domestic wells within 1,500 feet of all active leaking underground storage tanks by site, by state. And you can see the spatial distribution here, and you can see, Florida has almost 60,000 private domestic wells near active releases. And then we estimate that there's a 250,000 private domestic wells within 1,500 feet of an active release in the country. And then great. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll show you the demo now. Okay, so this is US Finder. It's publicly available. I think there's a link to it in the chat, in the GoToWebinar chat. So if you want, you can play along with me if you like. But so the layer list here is at the bottom left, and here is what contains all the layers. We've got releases, facilities, and then this data by county. What you're looking at now are the number of facilities by county. We just aggregated the points up to the county level. We can click any county and get information on the number of facilities in that county, the number of open USTs, and the number of closed USTs. And again, we did the same with the releases. So we can click on the county. We can see that there are 678 releases in that county, and 20 of them are open. So it's just kind of a national perspective by county of this data. Let's see here. Now we can zoom into any area of the country, and we can look at the individual underground storage tank facilities. Here what we're looking at, the dark blue dots here are facilities with at least one active underground storage tank, and the light blue dots are facilities with all historic tanks. They've all been removed. We can zoom in anywhere here. We're in Chattanooga, and I can show you kind of what's embedded within these points. So I can click on the facility. It'll give you the name of the facility, the state issued facility ID, and then we've got the locational information. I should add that a lot of the data that we received from states didn't have coordinates, so that the EPA geocoded about, I don't know, 500,000 points. So basically, we took the address and we placed it on the map. So here we geocoded this location, and then we give a sense of the accuracy of this location. So this is pretty accurate. Here we've got the number of open underground storage tanks. There's 2 at this facility. The number of closed and the number of temporarily out of service tanks. Also included is the land use within 300 feet of that facility. Here it's a developed low intensity land use. We estimate that there's 1,300 people living within 1,500 feet. And again, we've got the number of private domestic wells within 1,500 feet. And again, we have this information for 800,000 facilities, 2.2 million tanks, and over 500,000 releases. And then embedded, we also have, we ask, is this facility within a source water protection area? The source water protection area just means that there's a public drinking water intake nearby. The EPA delineates these areas, and we see that this site is near a public drinking water intake, and then we provide the public water system ID and the facility ID. So this is near a surface water intake, and then we also delineate by, is it within a groundwater wellhead protection area? So we have that information too, and that facility is not within a wellhead protection area. And then for every location, we have whether it's within a 100-year floodplain. And then so this graph shows the 3 tanks, or this bar chart shows that the 3 tanks at that facility and the capacities of those tanks. So this one here is 12,000. So like I said, there is a related database of the facilities with all the underground storage tanks. So let's now look at the individual underground storage tanks at this location. We click here at the related tables, and we can see 3 tanks. We can look at things like the status of the tanks. There's 2 open, 1 TOS tank. So let's look at the attributes of these tanks. I click this and I say just view these tanks in an attribute table, and this table pops up. So query tanks, this is the facility ID, the tank, the state issued tank ID, the status of the tank, the installation dates. So this tank was installed in 1983. 2 of these are 12,000 gallons. They're all containing gasoline. And then we have the wall type. So of the 2.2 million tanks that we have the wall type for over 40 states, either double or single walled. And I can close the attribute table like that. An important part of any kind of like data analysis is just kind of querying out the data to find what you're looking for, whatever you're interested in. So we've included some filters within this application to easily query data, so that you don't have to like write the SQL or know any coding, that you can just click a few toggles and you can query data. So let me kind of give you an example of that. Let me just. Okay, so let's say I'm interested in facilities within Tennessee. I just toggle that. And let me zoom out. So these are all the facilities in Tennessee. And let's say I just want to look at facilities with active underground storage tanks. I can query that. And now we're looking at open tanks within Tennessee. And in terms of vulnerability, let's just say, show me facilities that have at least one private domestic well within 1,500 feet. And I can toggle that. I can say, show me sites that are within a floodplain. And I can toggle that. And then so here, let's just say, and within a surface water, source water protection area. And so now we've got all these criteria compounded on each other, and now we can look at the sites within Tennessee. And we can zoom into one here and kind of look at what the site looks like. Let me switch to a base map here. So this is East Island Fuel, and then we can look at how many tanks are there. There's 4 open tanks. It's within a floodplain. Right here, there's a river going by. It's within a source water protection area. And there's about 20 private domestic wells within 1,500 feet, which you can kind of imagine that, but these homes not hooked up to a public drinking water system. So that's just an example of how you can kind of query the data. Let me undo these. What I think what's really valuable about this application is the private domestic well information embedded within all of these sites. Just kind of give you another example. Let me try not to make you dizzy by moving around the map. Okay. Let me move up to Indianapolis, if I can find it. Okay. So here are all the underground storage tanks facilities within Indianapolis. And let's say I'm worried about, or I want to look at underground storage tank facilities with a lot of private domestic wells nearby, just to kind of triage risk. So I can go in here and say, show me all of the facilities with at least 300 private domestic wells within 1,500 feet. I can toggle that, and here's one. There's one site. And we can look at the base map, and we can see that this is a speedway, and it's got a lot of homes nearby that are not connected up to a public drinking water network. And we can see that there are 580 people living here and 301 wells nearby. And we can start to look at what tanks are near this location. So that's just another example of querying the data. You can also query the individual tanks themselves. We can open up this table. We can go to the underground storage tank layer. So what I'm doing here is I'm opening up the table, and now we're looking at all the underground storage tanks. Here at the bottom left, you can see that there's 2.27 million tanks within this table. And let's say that I want to find large biodiesel tanks. Well, how do I query that? Let me show you. So you go into the options here and you click filter. And then you go to the add expression tab. And I say, well, the substance. I want to know if the substance contains, say, anything that has the word bio in it. And I'm interested in looking at facilities that are currently open, right? So return all the biodiesel in open tanks. And within a second, it's queried 2.2 million records, and it came up with 847. And I can sort this, and I can see here that there's, 40,000 gallon biodiesel tank. Now this table is not spatial, but it can be linked to the facility database by clicking options. And I want to show the related record here. And then I will double click this. And now it's taking me to the facility that has the 40,000 gallon biodiesel tank. There's a US Oil Fox River terminal. And we can click it and get more information about this terminal that has these large tanks. There's 41 people living nearby. It's within a groundwater wellhead protection area. It's within a floodplain. So important information to know about a facility holding that much fuel. Okay, so I showed you, the facilities, how to filter the facilities, the tanks, how to filter the tank data. Let me show you the leaking underground storage tank component within UST Finder. So I will go into the layer list and I will select the releases data. Let me move over to Iowa, and I will turn on the releases layer. And here are all the leaking underground storage tanks. Here the legend, the pink dots here show releases that have been cleaned up that require no further action. And the red dots indicate a open release or an active release. And like the facility layer, we can click any location and we can get the facility ID and then the LUST ID. And that, I should note that we paid close attention to maintain the state database nomenclature. So here I can take this LUST ID, copy it, and I can go over to the Iowa DNR database. We like to think of UST Finder as kind of a companion to maybe some other state databases that may contain more information on a release than what UST Finder provides. So I can go in here and just paste that number into the Iowa DNR site and get more information about that release than what's within the UST Finder. I promise you I tested this earlier and it worked. But let me try it one more time. No, take my word for it. So yeah, again, so you can take the facility IDs, you can take tank IDs, you can take LUST IDs, and look at individual state databases and get more information. And then, okay, so again, with the leaking underground storage tank information, again, we got locational information. Here we see that the data was state source. So the coordinates were taken from the state. We've got the reported date of the release. This release was in 1990. The status of the release is open. And then again, how many people live nearby? How many private domestic wells are nearby? What's the land use? And the source water protection area information, and is it within a floodplain? And so we've got over 500,000 locations within the country with that type of information embedded in it. Now let's go up to Minneapolis. And like with the facility layer, you can also start to filter and kind of triage the leaking underground storage tank sites. So here, let's just say, I'm in Minneapolis and I am interested in releases that are currently open. So and then we see the red dots. And if I'm interested in, or concerned or worried or interested in cleaning up sites within a densely populated area, I can say, well, there needs to be at least 300 people living nearby. And let's say that the land use is developed high intensity. And I can toggle that. And then these sites meet all three of these criteria. And I'm kind of giving this as an example of, maybe remediation selection. Do you want to use biosparging or bioventing in a densely populated area? This is a way of kind of triaging this and maybe looking at, if you're concerned with petroleum vapor intrusion, this can tell you that there's a lot of people nearby. This site, there are 3,600 people living nearby this active site, and it's in a high developed area. And so there are also some other features that are within US Finder that really make this kind of a user-friendly application. Let me give you some examples. Okay, so we've got a near me tool. So let's say I'm kind of concerned what's in my backyard, or I want to know if there's a release in my backyard, or if there's tanks in my backyard. I can use this tool. Bear with me here. Okay, so I click this near me. Let's say I live here. Let's say I live right here. It'll draw a radius and show you which leaking underground storage tanks and underground storage tank facilities are within a defined area. So let's look at, show me all the releases and tanks within 0.5 miles of where I live. And it'll generate this list, and it'll tell you the distance to the closest releases. Like that. And it's also GPS enabled, so you can use your GPS and get that information. If you're an emergency responder, and depending on the scenario, and you're going into an area or a building and you want to know if there's a tank nearby, you can just basically click this little button and it'll tell you all the tanks nearby. And I should note that this application works really well on tablets and phones as well. And there's also some neat little tools to play around with. There's a kind of an info summary tool that just counts the number of facilities or the number of releases within a map frame, within your map frame right here. And it tells you that there's 14 open leaking underground storage tanks within this map frame. Okay. Okay, so we also included within the application, this is wildfire season, and there's a lot going on right now. So we've included a data layer that shows daily updated wildfire perimeters in this country. So here they are, and you can see the wildfire perimeters. Here we're in Oregon, and then we can look at the vulnerability of our UST systems to these wildfires. So here I've just toggled on the facility layer, and we can kind of look at what potential risks these USTs have with wildfires. We've included a tool where you can kind of easily generate a report or an area of interest report of any area you want, whether it's a source water protection area or a fire area, or maybe it's a hurricane path. What you can do is you can either upload a shapefile that defines your area, or you can just draw a polygon and say, well, I'm interested in this forest fire. Bear with my drawing skills here. And I can say, well, generate me a report showing all the releases and all the underground storage tanks within this perimeter. And then all I do is just click, report and print and print. And then a report is generated, and it gives you information on all 37 facilities within that area of interest and all 30 releases within that area of interest. And it'll also generate a map here when it's done rendering. But I guess I won't wait for it. There's one thing I cannot stress enough. If you're using this tool, I would suggest definitely looking at this handy button up in the top right. It's called Add Data. And you can basically search and import data from your organization or just from ArcGIS Online. Basically, pretty much anything you can think of, there's a data layer that you can kind of embed within this application to look at the proximity of your data layer and tanks or releases. So it's really great. I was playing around with it today, and I was looking at NOAA's coastal flooding. And nothing is working for me today. Let me reload this. Bear with me. Okay. So I want to look on ArcGIS Online. I want to look at NOAA. Coastal. What's going on? Okay, well, there we go. Maybe I was spelling that wrong. Okay, so here's NOAA's coastal flooding hazard map, right? It shows areas that can be inundated by high tide, by sea level rise, and they basically make this composite map, and you can just overlay it with your facilities. So here we're just looking at Florida, and we can look at the intersection of potential coastal flooding and our USTs. Right, very cool, and it just loads right away. If water inundation is a concern, and we looked at Hurricane Harvey before, this is a really great tool of looking at the intersection of flooding and our USTs. There's other things that you can use the site for. You can look at things like depth to bedrock. Said that wrong. So here's the USDA has a file here that's provided by Esri, and you can look at maybe the intersection of your releases, your active releases, to the depth of the bedrock, which may be helpful with remediation strategies or potential contamination of groundwater. Let me remove the NOAA layer. So we can zoom into an area, and these are areas that have the depth bedrock information within it. And we can click on the site, and we can see that the depth of bedrock is 91 centimeters. We can look at the releases information. And this is just an example. I mean, we can pull in a ton of soil data, such as porosity, hydrologic group, the amount of clay content in soil. We can start to overlay this and start to be able to kind of, in relation to releases, kind of triage risk and maybe look at the potential of migration of plumes based on a lot of the data that's provided by the USDA. I guess in the interest of time, I'll hand it over and we can take some questions. Does that sound good to everybody?
Thanks, Alex. This is Charles again. Thanks again for a thorough presentation, Fran and Alex. I gave Alex a warning before Q&A that I may have missed him answering some of these questions, so if they're repetitive, bear with me. I'm also going to bunch bounce around here some of these questions. A lot of them are related or duplicative, so bear with me. It looks like we will be able to get to all of them. So I'll start pretty generally. A few folks had asked this: when was the data collected for states, and do you have a sense of when they will be updated?
Fran, why don't you take that?
Oh, okay. So this data was collected from late 2018 through 2019. So this is just a static snapshot of our data. With regard to moving forward, we here in this slide just really represents what we're already thinking about version 2. So we're just releasing version 1 and already focused on version 2. One of the things that we heard back clearly as well from some of the states who were interested in providing information more routinely, so it's updated more frequently, and also wanted to do this in an automated way. So we're designing the next version so we can do both a poll from the states who are not able to do this as automatically, as well as a push of that data where states are in a position to routinely provide that to us. And so we see this as a very dynamic database moving forward, which will also be extremely helpful for the range of events that we're talking about and the dynamic nature of the sites and the conditions under which they would be experiencing. So we see this in turn, the data applying not only to our tanks world, of course, but being especially helpful for emergency response. And then thirdly, to our water community, so they have the most updated information on our tanks and tank facilities.
Thank you, Frit. The next set of questions are going to be basically about available data. I had one just come in about data for the territories, specifically in Region 2, and I guess we can throw out Region 9 as well. Will there be a push for this data?
We'd be happy to work with our regions and the territories in putting this data together. As well, we are continuing to work with our regions and incorporating tribal data. Some states have tribal data in the database, so we're going to be looking more concertedly towards the future and building that into this as well.
Thank you, Fran. And what about ownership data? And then a few have asked about federally owned USTs and facilities and Department of Defense.
With regard to DoD, we have worked with them, and to date, the DoD facility data is not contained in here. However, states have that data, and we can and will be working with DoD on their specific data.
Let's see, do we have the ability to view either active and or inactive tanks only? For example, if I only want to see active tanks, do we have this ability?
Yeah, and I was on mute before. Regarding the DoD data, we did collect that data, and it is behind our firewall. If you're interested in it, we can chat further about releasing that data to you. But we do have it. But it was removed from the public application. Evan, can you repeat that second question? Sorry.
Oh yeah, and I believe you did answer this. Is there ability to view either active and or inactive tanks only?
Yeah, let me just, yeah, so I gave that example of, and you can see my screen, right, Charles?
Yep.
Okay. So all I did here was I clicked this little button and it pops up the attribute table. I click USTs. Here we see 2.2 million tanks. And what we can do is just go to the filter button, add expression, tank status. here's just showing me all the unique entries, and I can just click open. And then here it's queried out all the open tanks. We've got 500,000 active tanks. So that's how you can do that.
What about tank age? Is that available as a filter for example, if you go down to the county or state level, can you bring up the age of tanks?
Yeah, so here we're looking at, again, the UST table, and here we have an installation date. And you can query that kind of the same way. We can go with installation date is, let's say, it was after, and then I can select a date and query that. So these are all the active underground storage tanks that were installed after October 2019. We've got 300.
Great. Let's see. And we kind of answered this. One person noted that there was an owner or station name change that is different now than the data that's being displayed. So I'm assuming that could be updated in the future releases.
Yeah, I mean, whatever is provided by the state is what's kind of embedded in here. But with the new version will reflect any changes that the state made.
And I believe you showed this as well, but a filter for tank type steel versus FRP.
Steel or like fiberglass?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information that is not included that could be. The problem in developing this database was the kind of disparate ways that states collected information and the amount of information that they collected. Some states had just a wealth, a plethora of data going into like details about the piping and the dope and the facets and everything. And some states were a little bit more bare. In order to kind of maintain this as like a national database, we took all the elements that were common among all states. So in terms of the construction type, we do not have that data in here, although that is something that we are looking to do in the future with the next version, is include some of those some more detailed information about the physical properties of the tank.
Great. We had a couple questions about exporting your filtered data to the Excel spreadsheet. Do you run an example real quick?
Yeah. So the way this application works, so what we're seeing on the map is reflected in the table. Okay, so here we're looking at the facilities table. There's 404 features, and that reflects what we're seeing in the map here. And what I do is I just hit the options button and I export to CSV. I should note that there's a 2,000 count limit to this. If you need more than 2,000 features to be exported, contact me and we'll work it out.
Okay, some more questions about types of data. I guess this would be all for future releases. Is there thought about adding US compliance equipment information? Let's see, tank and piping material was another question.
Mm-hmm.
Just throwing these out there because I don't think they're available now, but they could be in the future.
Yeah, is there anything you want to add to that, Fran? I mean, I think the broad answer is we're looking to develop that in the future. It's important, and we want to include as much as we can. But Fran?
Surely, as we're working towards version 2, we very much want to work with SWMO and the states in developing the data that is most useful to them. So as we are pursuing, for example, some questions about corrosion and the specific components in the tank system, there are elements there that would be very helpful in understanding potential for corrosion. So we absolutely look forward, and we'll be providing and working through ASTSWMO to get feedback from the states on what are some of the critical elements in the next database that would be helpful to you beyond what we already have.
Thank you. Specific to domestic well information, how old is the well data, and how often do you see this being updated?
The well data is based on method. The baseline data is the 1990 census data, which is the last time there was a national survey of what is your drinking source. Subsequent to this, then we've added all the state well logs for all the states that have that since 1992, 2010. And so these, the density of the well logs is based on the latest census of 2010. And of course, we'll be updating that once the 2020 census is released, and we'll have some new numbers for that.
All right. Several questions about data for ASTs. Is this something that could be added at some point? Above ground storage tanks.
That's beyond, certainly for this program, our focus is underground storage tank, but also having said that, realize that there's an interest in the ASTs and compiling that information. That data is also resides with the state, so it really at this point it's a function of the data that's available. So at the present time, we don't have anything specific underway on the ASTs.
Is there a way for the UST Finder layer or data to be added to an existing map content? Or would I need to? Okay, go ahead.
So you can download the data, the spatial files. You can do it that way and use it however you want. A lot of states have great mapping programs of their own, and they use Esri. And if your organization has an Esri account, you can go in and pull in all of your organization's spatial data. Sorry, let me back up. If you have your own web map as an organization, or web mapping feature or system, you can go in and just search ArcGIS Online and type in US Finder, then add it to your map. So if you have a map or map system that you like and that your organization uses or your state uses, you can just pull in the data into that, or you can just download the data, the spatial data, and use it however you like. So it's very flexible in how you can use it.
Okay, I have 2 more unanswered questions. Anything that comes in after this, feel free to send them and we can answer them after the fact by email or phone. First one, can you give a quick overview of the backend data management, type of relational database, storage, maintenance, etc.?
Yeah, that was the very large challenge to this whole project, and I think it's kind of why it hadn't been done thus far. Like I alluded to it earlier, that every state had a different way of storing and collecting and describing a tank and a release. A lot of different formats, Oracle or an Access database or a spreadsheet. It was kind of a brute force project. We got 150 different databases, the compartment databases, had to link the USTs facilities to the facility data. I mean, I wish I don't have like a great one word answer, but I guess it depended on the way that the data was collected from the state. We kind of had to work with it like on a state by state basis and start to compile it nationally. But in terms of the relational database, yeah, there's the UST table is related to the facilities, and independent of those two data sets are the leaking underground storage tank data.
Okay, last question. Will the limitations on the data, for example, age, static nature, et cetera, be disclosed somewhere on the website so people know what data they're looking at?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I guess we've mentioned some of the limitations on the data and where the data came from. Will this somehow be disclosed on the website?
Yeah, so all that information in terms of crediting where the data came from, it's in the user manual. So if you just click this I button and download the user manual, at the end, there's sources for all the UST facility and release data sets. And it's also in the metadata of the spatial files as well.
Okay, great. Well, that was the last question. As a reminder, you can send questions now. Feel free to email me as well, charlesr@aswmo.org, or Fran and Alex with any other questions for this. The questions that were submitted were archived, so we'll go back through them just in case we didn't answer anything. And before I turn it over to EPA Alice and Will Anderson to close this session, just want to remind you all, several tanks program webinars are coming up by ASTSWMO. NUIPIC as part of their National Tanks Conference webinar series, and ITRC has a PVI training that I believe is later this week or early next week. So the links are right here. I'll leave them up on the screen till the closing, and it'll also be shared on the webinar's recording and presentation materials soon on the SWMO's website. And with that, I will turn it over to Will.
Thanks, Charles. Sorry, Mark had to go to another meeting, so he wasn't able to stay through the whole meeting. But I wanted to just say, A, thank you to ASTSWMO for setting up this webinar. And then B, thanks to all the attendees. I know we had a real range of folks. We had a lot of state regulators, some EPA regional folks, a number of industry folks, a few tribal folks. So this was our kind of our general launch webinar. We will follow up with some more detailed work directly with the SWMO and the states. I think Fran mentioned we're working to bring in Indian land country data. EPA is currently compiling all of that from regional databases. And I think, you know, we're excited because we've never had this information before. Our program has always been data light. We don't have a national database. So to get this, even though it is a static snapshot from 2018, 2019, has been a real boon. And I think a lot of the information that Fran and Alex discussed with as far as, you know, flooding potential, groundwater vulnerability, there's a lot of interesting things in there that'll probably be of use to even the states that have the most sophisticated systems. So again, I just want to thank everyone for attending. We have lots of work to do to fulfill the vision of this system. Fran alluded to that with version 2, bring in more data elements, but we're excited with where we've gotten. I will say that Fran and Alex did the lion's share of the work here. They did all the heavy lifting. The rest of the folks that they thanked were along for the ride on their coattails, but we're really excited about the system and its potential. So thanks to everyone, and we'll be working with the SWMO going forward to figure out how to move toward version 2. So that's it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.